Seize the Storm was recently downshifted in Innistrad Remastered, and today we're going to stomp opponents with it in Pauper. After seeing an undefeated list, I decided to make some adjustments to improve it. First, I added Grixis Wildfire. As much as I hate it, the card fits perfectly alongside Malevolent Rumble, helping you ramp into Riding Chrysalis on turn 3. Another major addition that provides an extra win condition alongside Seize the Storm. A card that grows with each instant or sorcery in the graveyard, and every exiled card with flashback. In a deck packed with removal spells like Cast Down, Snuff Out, and Breath Weapon, fueling it is an easy feat. Of course, Deadly Dispute and Eviscerator's Insight work perfectly with the artifact-heavy team in a deck ready to crush the Pauper meta. As expected against the Mirror, the early turns were all about setting up. I ramped ahead of schedule with Grixis Wildfire, while my opponent played a Blood Fountain and passed. On my turn, I played Ichor Wellspring, and on theirs, they followed up with Deadly Dispute into Refurbished Familiar. So I discarded Cast Down. I took out their creature, then used my own Deadly Dispute to draw 3 cards. Eventually, I found Riding Chrysalis and slammed it onto the board. On their turn, they played a Grixis Wildfire of their own and followed up with another familiar, so I discarded a second Cast Down. My next turn saw me casting Eviscerator's Insight for 2 more cards, which led me to a Lightning Bolt, perfect for taking out their flyer. I attacked, played a land, and passed. They killed my Chrysalis on their turn, and back on mine, I played another Ichor Wellspring and used Eviscerator's Insight again to refill my hand. On their turn, they found their own Riding Chrysalis and used the tokens to play another Ichor Wellspring before passing. I looted away Twisted Landscape and used Cast Down to remove their Chrysalis, then passed again. This kind of back and forth resource trading is typical in this matchup. Whoever gains the upper hand will eventually snowball into victory. After a few setup turns, I managed to wipe out some Eldrazi tokens with Breath Weapon for extra value. I also took care of both Chrysalises, but without a win condition, things got tough. Suddenly, my opponent dropped a massive Nyxborn Hydra, and just like that, I lost game 1. My sideboard isn't great against Jund Wildfire, but I swapped out dead cards like Breath Weapon for Artifact Hate and Duress to disrupt their plans. This strategy paid off. I kept them off lands with a well-timed Deglammer and set up freely for my next turns. Eventually, a single Duress was enough to make them scoop. On to game 3. Starting with a mulligan to 5 is rough, but I had enough card advantage pieces, especially with Ichor Wellspring and Deadly Dispute, to stay in the game. With a bit of luck, I drew an untapped mountain and used Grixis Wildfire to ramp ahead. My opponent mimicked the play and passed. Back on my turn, I dropped Ichor Wellspring and passed. My opponent fired off 2 more Grixis Wildfires before passing, and at the end of their turn, I used Deadly Dispute to draw 3 more cards. I untapped, played my newly drawn Seize the Storm, and passed. They hadn't seen this card before, and while it was just a 3/3 at first, trust me, it was going to get big. On their turn, they played Riding Chrysalis, so on mine, I ramped with more Grixis Wildfires, growing my Elemental token. Then, I used Snuff Out to kill their Chrysalis. Of course, they had Eviscerator's Insight to get some value out of it, but I still managed to deal 6 damage and passed. After a few setup turns with Ichor Wellspring and Grixis Wildfire, my opponent surprisingly left my big token alone. Maybe they were holding Snuff Out, but I wasn't going to wait. I played Malevolent Rumble and flashback Seize the Storm to avoid any graveyard hate. Then I attacked. And just like that, I put them down to 5. My opponent drew a ton of cards and eventually dropped Riding Chrysalis and Avenging Hunter to apply pressure. They followed up with Cast Down on one of my tokens, but I responded with Eviscerator's Insight to draw 2 more cards. As expected, I used my removal to clear the board. The big bad token finished the job, taking the match. For our second match, we faced one of the newest Pauper decks, Mono Black Glaze Fiend Affinity. As expected, the first few turns were all about setting up. My opponent played a Refurbished Familiar, forcing me to discard a useless Snuff Out. After a few exchanges, I managed to land a Riding Chrysalis, but unsurprisingly, it got removed immediately. They then changed some card draw spells, played a Shambling Ghast, and attacked. After running the numbers, I decided to use Deadly Dispute to draw some cards, and luckily I found Grixis Wildfire to ramp ahead. At this point, my plan was to use my token and an untapped land to set up a Breath Weapon on their turn. Sure enough, they committed a Glaze Fiend to the board, and when they tried to pump their familiar with a map token, I pulled the trigger, wiping the board clean. My opponent followed up with a Blood Fountain, meaning those creatures would be coming back later. Still, overall, it was a solid turn for me. On my turn, I used the Eviscerator's Insight to draw some extra cards, but with no strong plays, I had to pass. The upside, I could fire off a second Insight on their turn, drawing more cards while discarding lands to their familiar, after they brought it back with Blood Fountain. Back on my turn, I played a Riding Chrysalis, followed by a Malevolent Rumble, and passed. My opponent responded with a Deadly Dispute, likely planning to remove one of my tokens. Seeing this, I used my available mana to flashback Eviscerator's Insight, drawing 2 more cards. Of course, a cast down took out the Chrysalis, and a second familiar forced another land discard. I took 2 damage. As expected, I used Duress to check their hand and removed an offering, but in hindsight, I should have waited for their Packdoll Terror to hit the board so I could remove it with Lightning Bolt, a misplay on my part. I then played an Ichor Wellspring and passed. On their turn, my opponent finally played the Packdoll Terror and drained some life from me by playing more artifacts. Back on my turn, I used Deadly Dispute for more card draw, followed by a Malevolent Rumble, revealing another Wellspring. Then, I played Seize the Storm to put immediate pressure on the board. Seeing my big token, my opponent gained some life with Lembas and passed, climbing up to 30 life. After some quick math, I realized I couldn't take them out in one turn, so I cast a few more spells, brought them down to 8, and used the flashback on Seize the Storm. As expected, they drew their next card and scooped. My sideboard plan was straightforward, bring in all my artifact hate and cut less relevant main deck cards. It felt odd to bring in artifact hate when they weren't playing artifact lands, but it was a minor drawback since this removal could still hit their creatures. I played an Ichor Wellspring, and my opponent found a Glaze Fiend and a refurbished familiar before passing. In response, I had to use Deadly Dispute to dig for a land. After missing, I played a Malevolent Rumble, fully committing to the search. Thankfully, I found one just in time. At this point, I was bracing for a big hit from Glaze Fiend, but to my surprise, my opponent didn't go all in. The damage could have been much worse. On my turn, I used Deadly Dispute again, hoping to hit more lands. After finding a bridge, I decided to clear the board. My opponent played a second familiar and discarded a Nihil Spellbomb for extra card draw. On my next turn, I played Riding Chrysalis with mana open for Deadly Dispute, then passed. They played a Packdoll Terror, but since they couldn't push through, they simply passed. Back on my turn, I removed the Terror, immediately played a second Riding Chrysalis and attacked. Before damage, I sacrificed some tokens to cast Deadly Dispute, netting extra cards and damage, bringing them down to 17. My opponent played a few more creatures but had no major follow-ups, so it was my turn again. I attacked to see how they respond, and post-combat, I played Seize the Storm for additional pressure. My opponent kept deploying artifacts, growing their Glaze Fiend to a dangerous size. Luckily, a Deglammer was exactly what I needed to shut it down. Worth noting, Nihil Spellbomb doesn't fully remove a Seize the Storm token. While they did exile the graveyard, I just needed to chain more spells to rebuild it into a massive threat. With that in mind, I attacked. They removed my Chrysalis, but it wasn't enough to stop me, and I eventually closed out the match. For our third match, we faced one of the strongest decks in Pauper, Grixis Affinity. As usual, the plan was to set up in the early turns. Jund Wildfire is one of the best cards to play on turn 2 since it accelerates mana and card draw, setting up a potential turn 4 Riding Chrysalis. My opponent led with Krark Clan Shaman, which I immediately took out with Lightning Bolt before playing Colony Garden and using Eviscerator's Insight on it to draw 2 more cards. Seeing my opponent play a land and pass, I took the opportunity to gain some card advantage. I played Ichor Wellspring, followed by Jund Wildfire, to ramp up my mana and draw more cards. After casting Thoughtcast, my opponent passed again, signaling they were likely holding reactive spells. Sensing an opening, I played Riding Chrysalis. I then used a token to cast Malevolent Rumble, but my opponent responded with Galvanic Blast to kill it. In response, I sacrificed it to a second Eviscerator's Insight for more card draw. After the dust settled, I hit a land of Malevolent Rumble and passed. My opponent followed up with Deadly Dispute and another Thoughtcast, drawing 4 cards, confirming they were digging for answers. Seeing this, I played my Seize the Storm token from the graveyard and passed. As expected, they removed it, and after untapping, they played Mirror Enforcer before passing back. While I could remove the Enforcer, doing so would just give them extra cards from Deadly Dispute. So instead, I played another Seize the Storm and passed. Sure enough, they used Deadly Dispute, and seeing an opportunity, I tried to kill the Enforcer before they could draw more cards. Unfortunately, they had another one ready, getting full value out of their play. Still, I had board presence and planned to use my own Deadly Dispute for more cards on my turn. At this point, it feels like every deck is running this card. Do you think its usage rate warrants a ban? Let me know in the comments. Back in the game, my opponent flooded the board and made me discard 2 cards. Not ideal. However, I used Deadly Dispute, eventually drawing into Duress. I took one of their Galvanic Blasts and attacked with an Elemental token. Post-combat, I played another Seize the Storm. At this point, the only way they could kill me was with a Krark Clan Shaman combo using Poison and Toxin Analysis. Anticipating this, I held back removal in case they attempted it. On their turn, they drew 4 cards before finally playing the Shaman and going for the combo. As planned, I removed it just in time, forcing them to scoop. We had at least 6 dedicated sideboard cards against Affinity, and I planned to use them all. We started slow, but the key was fetching a forest to set up the Glamour on turn 2. That's exactly what happened. But I waited for my opponent to tap out of black mana first, just in case they had Deadly Dispute. Once their black source was gone, the next plan was to fetch a red source to use Ancient Grudge. On my turn, I played Malevolent Rumble, fetching an Ichor Wellspring, played a tap bridge, and passed. My opponent played a tap bridge, and I immediately used Ancient Grudge to take out their blue source. They looted away a card in response, but I wasn't done. Now that they were completely restricted on mana, I freely developed my board and applied pressure. I played a Seize the Storm token and passed. With no resources left, my opponent quickly fell behind, and as expected, I closed out the game for the win.